Hi everyone, welcome to our Cooperatives 101 webinar. I'm Courtney Berner, the Executive Director at the UW Center for Cooperatives. This webinar on co-op basics will help get everyone on the same page in terms of the things that make co-ops different from other types of businesses. This is part of a 7-part webinar series on how co-ops can be used to meet community needs. The primary audience is people engaged in economic development across the state of Wisconsin. However, other interests and people from other states are, of course, welcome to join. So I will be joined today by Margaret Bow, Cooperative Development Specialist at USDA Rural Development. So let's get started. So what is a cooperative? A cooperative is a business that is owned and democratically controlled by the people who use its services. This means that cooperatives are member-owned. The people who use the business own the business. They have at-risk capital in the business. It also means that cooperatives are controlled democratically by those members, by those owners. And we'll talk about what that means a little more later. And lastly, it means that members benefit from the cooperative based on how much they use that cooperative. There are over 30,000 cooperatives spread across the United States. The highest concentrations are found in the upper Midwest, in the Northeast, and along the West Coast, although you can see on this map that there are truly cooperatives in every state. There are about 800 cooperatives in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin has a rich cooperative history. The first co-op was started in 1841 by Ann Pickett, who pooled milk near Lake Mills, Wisconsin, in order to distribute cheese to Milwaukee. Wisconsin is also a pioneer in cooperative law. The state legislature actually sent a small team of attorneys to Europe to glean the best of the co-op statutes from across Europe. And then they brought those learnings back and actually used them to develop Wisconsin state statutes, which have been copied in other states around the country. There's also a remarkable concentration of co-op aid in Madison and around the state. We have the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives, which was founded in the early 60s. There are also national and international credit union headquarters here. So Madison for a very long time has been sort of a hot pot of cooperative activity and learning and discourse and development. Also of note is the Driftless region, which is a region in the southwestern part of the state where that I would also describe as a hotspot of co-op development. So you have Organic Valley there, and then you also have cooperatives that have been there for over 100 years, and new cooperatives that are being formed all the time. The latest one that we worked with is actually a music cooperative that's working to bridge the gap between new artists and people who like to listen to music and buy music in southwestern Wisconsin. So why do people start cooperatives? There are a lot of reasons that one might start a cooperative. So first, potentially to meet an unmet social or economic need. For example, you might need access to childcare, but there aren't any good childcare options in your community. You might come together with other parents and start a parent-owned childcare cooperative, or you might partner with an employer to develop some sort of multi-stakeholder childcare cooperative. Another reason people start cooperatives is to address market power imbalances. So an example of this would be as a dairy farmer, if the processor doesn't come and pick up your milk, you're in big trouble because that milk has a short shelf life. And so some of the earliest cooperatives were in dairy processing because the farmers discovered that they needed to come together and then own their own processing plants in order to balance out that market power imbalance in the dairy industry. Another reason is that there are problems with alternatives. An example of this is in the 60s and 70s, people became interested in natural foods, organic foods, and they weren't able to find the types of foods that they were interested in consuming in traditional grocery stores. So they started buying clubs, many of which then turned into brick and mortar retail grocery stores. Another reason is to control decision-making. Think about a worker co-op, people who have maybe worked for other business owners or a boss, and they say, we would like to have more decision-making power in our day-to-day work life. They might start a worker cooperative where the workers actually own and democratically control that business. Cooperatives can help producers gain profits up the value chain. An example I like to talk about is Ocean Spray, and which is a farmer-owned cooperative that sells many products, but is most known for cranberries. And Ocean Spray is known for doing quite a bit of research and development. And one of the products that they developed that's been incredibly popular are craisins. And craisins, the input for craisins used to actually be a waste product. And they figured out a way to turn basically the wasted shells, skins of the cranberries into one of the products that has been the most popular products that they have ever sold. And so that certainly helps farmers gain profits up the value chain and help develop, additional profit from their product. Cooperatives are also relatively easy to enter and exit because cooperatives are owned by all of the members. If one member leaves, the whole business doesn't fall apart. So the structure is inherently easy for people to move in and out of. This is especially true in consumer co-ops. Also, there tends to be community support for cooperatives. People who have seen cooperatives positively affect one aspect of their lives might be interested in supporting the development of a cooperative in another industry that touches their lives.
Hello, everyone. My name is Margaret Bao. I'm a cooperative development specialist, and I've had the honor of helping to organize cooperatives across my home state of Wisconsin for the last 20 years. So what I would like to share with you today is the different types of cooperatives. And the different types of cooperatives are defined by who are the member owners of the co-op, be they consumer co-ops, the most common type of co-op in the United States, producer co-ops, shared services co-ops, worker co-ops, and multi-stakeholder co-ops. So let's start first with the consumer co-ops. This is the most common type of cooperative, and it includes a number of businesses and organizations that you interact with on a daily basis, be it the credit unions, be it the rural electric co-ops, be it healthcare co-ops and health insurance co-ops as well. We're going to highlight an example out of Menomonie in the northwest part of the state, the Menomonie Market Food Co-op. And they are a consumer-owned grocery store that sells natural, organic, and local foods. They were founded back in 1973 as a buyer's club, and they do have a large staff, 28 full-time, 9 part-time. They provide a set of wages and benefits to those members. They have expanded twice. They are up to 13,000 square feet, which is a pretty good medium-sized store. And their membership has grown to 2,000 households with annual sales of about $3.7 million. So they are very close to UW-Stout and an important part of the economy in Menomonie, member-owned. The next type of co-op are ones that we tend to think about in Wisconsin, and those are the producer co-ops, mainly farmers, but it could also be artist co-ops as well. Anyone that makes something in which you need to aggregate product, bring it to market, process it, distribute it, and to advertise it. And you see there on the screen various examples, some of our century-old cooperatives, such as Blue Diamond Almonds and Sunkist Oranges, and then some newer ones, such as Organic Valley and Bayfield Foods. We're going to highlight an example out of southwestern Wisconsin in the Driftless region, Westby Cooperative Creamery. And they are a co-op that processes and markets milk into branded stores as well as private label. The owners obviously are producers. They were founded in 1903 and 220 dairy family farmers. They are an important part of that small town. They provide employee ownership. They provide work for 135 people, and they are one of the few cooperatives in the country that includes both conventional and organic producers. Next, we move on to the shared services co-ops. And these co-ops often happen in the background, and people don't even realize that they're interacting with a cooperative. They can be individual businesses that retain their ownership but come together to do some joint marketing, some joint purchasing, or it can be nonprofits that come together. It can even be individual government agencies coming together. Some examples on the screen, You're probably aware of Ace Hardware. That is not a national franchise. That is a set of independent stores that have voluntarily come together to form a co-op. Best Western Hotels, that chain goes back to at least the 1950s. Independent Pharmacy Co-op. That started back in the 1980s in Madison, and started with 6 mom and pop pharmacies, and now they are now up to 4,600 member owners. So let's highlight an example, one that is one of those co-ops that happens in the background, the Valley Bakers Cooperative Association near Appleton, Wisconsin, and they provide bakery ingredient retail and wholesale supplies, cold transit storage, and logistics. They have an interesting story. After World War II ended and the end of rationing, there was a man named Francis Quigley that was a returned vet that was a bakery supply salesman. And he was going around, and prices for supplies were rapidly rising. And a lot of the bakers in the area didn't feel comfortable passing on higher prices to their customers. And so he suggested, why didn't they come together, pool their resources, and buy their supplies in bulk? And so they have grown and grown. They now have 400 member stores throughout Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And they are serving many third and even fourth generation bakers. So it's a wonderful example of support services needed to help small businesses stay in business. Next, we'll move on to the worker cooperatives. We have several here in the state of Wisconsin, such as Just Coffee Cooperative, they're coffee roasters, Union Cab Cooperative, 225 cab drivers, mechanics, and dispatch people. Cooperative Care Co-op I've had the honor of working with over the years in Wautoma, Wisconsin, providing home care services to people, elders and people with disabilities. And we're going to highlight one. It's Isthmus Engineering Cooperative, Isthmus Engineering and Manufacturing out of Madison. And they are a full service engineering company specializing in the concept, design, and build of custom automation solutions. And they've got various applications in the automotive, consumer products, medical, industrial, and solar industries. They're very interesting. They started in 1980. The owners are the workers, the employees of the cooperative, half of which are mechanical and electrical engineers. Right now, they have 34 member owners, a total of about 65 employees, sales at 25 million. So they're a rather large company that's been around for a while. They share that they're very project-based, open book management. They come together, they share a lot of information, and they're doing very high-end work. And it's very interesting that their worker co-op approach has helped them not only survive, but actually thrive in their industry. When there was an economic downturn back in 2008, 2009, everyone was quite aware within the co-op of what was going on. Information was fully shared. And they came to a group decision to cut back on their hours, to spread the pain amongst themselves, not to lay anyone off. And then when the economy started to do a little bit better, they were able to respond very quickly. Because they were a worker co-op, they were able to have that ability to make those decisions, whereas other engineering firms just laid people off. And then the final type of co-op that we're going to touch upon are the multi-stakeholder cooperatives. This is a relatively new concept here in the United States. It was pioneered in Italy back in 1991. It has become the most common type of co-op that's being organized right now in Quebec, Canada. And it's a way to rebuild complex systems, things that are very precious, such as local foods, healthcare, education. And so what you'll see in the United States, we tend to have homogeneous membership co-ops where we would have just a group of farmers in a producer co-op, or just a group of consumers in a co-op, or just a group of workers. This type of cooperative allows you to bring all those perspectives together to make decisions. It used to be assumed that producers would want the highest price possible for the product and consumers would want to pay the lowest price possible. But for something that's as precious as rebuilding a local food system, you need to have all those perspectives. So I'm going to highlight one example that both Courtney and I have been very involved in, and it's the Fifth Season Cooperative also out of Viroqua, Wisconsin. They're a full service food broker, and they take local food that is grown within a 150-mile radius around the Viroqua area and distribute it to institutions such as hospitals, universities, school systems, and restaurants. They're a rather complex group. They've got 6 membership classes. That's rather large, unusual. Usually with multi-stakeholder co-op, you're talking about 2 or 3 different membership classes. And they have about 113 members, 62 producer members, and then they have something called producer groups. They felt it wouldn't be fair to have Organic Valley in the same category with individual farmers. So you have producers, producer groups. They have 25 processors, everyone from Snowpack Foods to Westby Cooperative Creamery. They have 3 distributors, Reinhardt Foods out of La Crosse, Indian Head, and Cisco. They have 16 buyers, and Gunderson Lutheran Healthcare System, UW La Crosse, UW Stout, the Menomonie School System, Viroqua Schools, and 1 worker member. So it's a fascinating co-op. They're very much a work in progress, but they're doing great, and it's exciting to see that information exchange that they are able to do based on their structure. Cooperatives worldwide strive to meet 7 co-op principles that were started in 1844 by the Rochdale pioneers, and it has morphed and continued to this very day. So let's go through some of those 7 co-op principles. The first principle is open and voluntary membership. And what that means is that cooperatives should not discriminate on the basis of race, gender, orientation, but you allow people into the co-op as it makes market sense. If the co-op has enough room in their market economy to invite new members in, then they can do so. But it's like co-op dating. It's, am I a good fit for the co-op, and is the co-op a good fit for me? So voluntary and open membership. The second co-op principle is democratic member control. And what that means is 1 member, 1 vote, regardless of how much you have invested in that cooperative. And this is the only place in our economy where we can take part democratically in what happens. Co-op principle number 3 is member economic participation. And because cooperatives strive to be independent, viable businesses, as owners, you need to contribute financially to the wherewithal of your cooperative. And we have various tools available to us to make that happen. Co-op principle number 4 is autonomy and independence. And what that means is that the cooperative is truly owned by the members themselves. It's not state-run, as we had in some Soviet era countries, and it's not owned by a local interest. You can't impose a cooperative upon a group of people. It needs to be done so in a way that's voluntary, that people are autonomous. Another aspect of this is that cooperatives, that the board represents the cooperative, and when you enter into contracts, the board should not have to sign personal waivers or personal guarantees when you take out a loan or you enter into a contract. That may not always be possible, especially for a startup organization, but that's the idea, that the board represents the entire group, and that the entire group, the entire cooperative, is truly autonomous and independent. The 5th co-op principle is education, training, and information. Cooperatives have good communication and need to have a lot of transparency so that people can make good decisions. You're co-owners, you're not just customers, you're co-owners of something, and you need to have some basic training to understand the financials, to understand the governance, to understand how meetings are run so that owners can make good decisions together. There's also an aspect of spreading the word about what is a cooperative, as well as sharing co-op principle number 6, cooperation amongst co-ops. Amongst the consumer food co-ops, they talk about P6ing, principle number 6, of sharing information with one another, of paying it forward. And we see this all the time with cooperatives, that they're very generous with sharing policies, with sharing their bylaws, with sharing contracts, with sharing information with one another, that we all grow in this together. It's a way to really support one another, and that leads into co-op principle number 7 of concern for community. This principle was added about 25 years ago, and it gets back to why we're in business to begin with, to provide good quality products and services to ourselves, and to make sure that the members are truly rooted in community and they have a vested interest in making sure that the community is doing well. So let's move on to the co-op values. And what you'll see, co-ops, the co-op values include self-help, self-responsibility, which tend to be a little more pull yourself up by your own bootstraps type of mentality. But there's also democracy, equality, equity, and solidarity. Those may be more liberal or progressive values. What that means is that it's all present, that the cooperative model transcends political ideologies. There's something in it for all of us, that it is about self-help, self-responsibility, but it's also about democracy, equality, equity, and solidarity. So it's a very exciting way of doing business. And that since you're being in business together and you need to have good transparency and open communication, we have these ethical values of honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for others.
All right, now let's take a look at how cooperatives differ from other entity types, namely investor-owned firms and nonprofits, in 3 key categories: ownership, control, and benefit. So AT&T, an example of an investor-owned firm, is owned by the investors or the shareholders. It's controlled by a board of directors that is elected by those shareholders on a 1-share, 1-vote basis. So control in an investor-owned firm is tied to relative investment level. Similarly, benefit from an investor-owned firm is based on your level of investment. Next, let's move over to the nonprofit category. Red Cross here is the example. So who owns Red Cross? The state technically does. So really no one owns nonprofits, but because nonprofits have their favorable tax status, because it is assumed that they are doing work that lightens or lessens the load, the burden on the state. However, if a nonprofit goes away, if it dissolves, typically its assets are distributed to another nonprofit that has a similar mission. So who controls a nonprofit? Also a board of directors. However, in most nonprofits, boards are appointed rather than elected. And I would argue, similar to majority stockholders and investor-owned firms, major donors tend to wield quite a bit of control within nonprofits. And then who benefits from a nonprofit? We've already talked about this a little bit. Really, it's the public. So those who are receiving the services from the nonprofit. Lastly, let's talk about cooperatives. So who owns a cooperative? The members own a cooperative. And the members also control that cooperative through electing a board of directors. So there's boards control all 3 of these entity types. However, uniquely in a cooperative, the board is elected by and from the membership on a 1-member, 1-vote basis. So control is tied to membership rather than a relative level of investment. Who benefits from a cooperative is also a differentiating factor. So in a cooperative, members benefit based on their use of the cooperative. And we'll talk about what that looks like in just a minute. So there are two key things that really set cooperatives apart from other entity types, and those are governance and finance. So let's start with governance. Governance is really how power and authority are distributed within an organization. And in a cooperative, they're distributed democratically. So in a co-op, you have members, and those members are responsible for electing the board, for amending the bylaws, and addressing other major issues as outlined in the bylaws, maybe a merger or major financial expenditure. The members entrust the board with the power to handle policy and governance matters that are not handled by the membership. Specifically, they select key managers, approve the budget, and set the co-op's strategic direction. The GM or CEO is responsible for carrying out the regular business of the firm. Management has influence and will often generate or review policies for the board and membership. So the second way that co-ops are really different from other entity types is through their financial structures. And this is just a really simple slide that I'll talk through, but I wanted to let you know that there is our next webinar in this series is actually on co-op finance basics. So please check that out. So in a cooperative, the cooperative member either sells, buys, or works for the co-op. And then the co-op retains a percentage of the sales to cover expenses. And then at the end of the year, if the co-op has generated a profit or a surplus, which is often called in a cooperative, the co-op may keep a percentage of those profits and then return a percentage of the profits to members based on their use of the cooperative. Again, and how use is defined depends on what type of cooperative it is. It could be how much milk you're selling to the co-op. It could be how many hours you've worked for the co-op. It could be how many groceries you've purchased through your cooperative. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about the co-op development process and some of the basic steps. So starting a cooperative is really starting a business. So many of the steps are the same as they would be if you were starting any other type of business. So let's talk through them. So the first step is really explore. So co-ops exist to meet a need. And so the first step really is to identify the problem or the opportunity that exists and to gauge broader interest. Are other people interested in coming together to meet this need? And quite frankly, can you solve this problem more effectively together than you could on your own? So if the answer to that question is yes, then this group will form a steering committee and really create a shared vision about what they're trying to accomplish with this cooperative. The next step is to assess. So it's really important when a group of people is starting a business that everyone's on the same page and that you conduct a feasibility study to really make sure that this is a business that's feasible. And if you're going to ask people to invest their money and time in this business, that it's possible to get it off the ground. So we often recommend that people have a third party conduct a feasibility study and then evaluate the results. So based on the results of the feasibility study, the group needs to decide whether or not to move forward. If the answer to that question is yes, you move on to the third step, which is incorporation. During this step, in order to create a cooperative, you have to draft articles of incorporation that are filed with the state, and then draft bylaws, which are similar to an operating agreement in an LLC. But the bylaws spell out lots of things about how decisions are made within the cooperative. What's the board structure? What are the requirements to become a member? Things like that. And then you legally incorporate, and the new co-op adopts those new bylaws. Step 4 is build. So really, like any business, you should have a business plan. How much capitalization are you going to need? What's your operational plan? How is membership going to be structured? How many members do you need in order to make this business feasible? And then during this time, you might also begin to engage in a membership drive. And at this point, I just want to say that these steps are listed sequentially, but as you'll see in the next slide, this is more, some of them will happen in parallel, and sometimes there are reasons for a business to incorporate earlier or later in the process, or to start the membership drive earlier or later in the process. So I just wanted to state that. So once you've completed a business plan and begun to conduct a membership drive, it's important, of course, to capitalize the business. In some cases, that might just be getting more members. Potentially, members are going to capitalize the new business entirely. But if it is a highly capital-intensive business, you may end up seeking startup capital, either a loan or a grant or preferred stock, some sort of non-member equity that you bring in. Again, I'll make a plug for our next webinar, which is on cooperative finance basics, which provides a wealth of information on the options for capitalizing cooperatives. So last, you launch the business. So secure staff, site, vendors, depending on what kind of business it is, and then launch the operations. All right, so as I alluded to earlier, the steps are listed sequentially. However, they may overlap, they may sort of not be exactly in that order depending on the process that the group is moving through. But I did want to spend a little time on how long you can expect this process to take you. You know, I've worked with cooperatives that have gotten up and running in 3 or 4 months. That is certainly not the norm. Depending on what kind of business you're working with, it could be 3 months, it could be 5 years. So it can really vary how quickly, both in terms of the industry you're looking at, how much capital you need to raise, how many members you need to recruit, and it can vary depending on the group and how quickly they want to move through the process. So for example, a worker co-op that has 5 members that's going to be in the service industry could probably get going pretty quickly, whereas grocery cooperatives that need to recruit upwards of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 members and millions of dollars to get the project off the ground can take 5, 6, or 7 years. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us for this first webinar in our series on cooperative basics. We hope you've learned a lot, and we hope you'll tune in for our future webinars. Thank you.